particular training in it, but you did a blog that more or less listed events and schedules, and slowly started to sneak in your own, general, average man opinion on architecture that you then get vetted somehow through your own blog to then get to write for the local papers. In any case, this is my open letter to Lynn Becker, down in the lower right, Lynn Becker on the problem with the pavilions. Just a quick, as part of this centennial, which I hope is over very soon, for the centennial of the Burnham Plan, both IIT and UIC were involved with the Art Institute in engaging Zaha Hadid with IIT and Ben von Berkel and UN Studio with UIC to do 2 pavilions that Joe Rosa really orchestrated with other funding. And so as part of these celebrations, there were these opening of these 2 pavilions. Needless to say, they were seen as outsiders, and this was part of the problem with the pavilions. So in any case, when you get Lynn Becker on the problem with the pavilions, so here he is, and then he ends up by saying, 2 stunning works from global superstars, Ben von Berkel and UN Studio, and Zaha Hadid. So this is more or less the status of criticism, which is, on the one hand, you think they're going to deliver a knockout punch, and then it's like, the problem with the pavilions, they're stunning. So then you say, okay, well, what is this 3,500-word article really about? And then maybe we get a clue. A pedestal is a poor place for taking the measure of a man. If there's been one deficiency in Chicago's exhaustive, exuberant celebration of Burnham and his plan, it's the absence of skepticism. So it's like, okay, finally, not about the pavilions, about Burnham. Let's be skeptical about Burnham. Great, sounds good. 2,500 words later, Burnham was a great man. Look at the article. Get it online. This is like the kind of false start criticism. I'm going to be really tough, but the pavilions are great. Burnham was great too. So you got to wonder, okay, Lynn, what is the problem? The problem apparently, because it's not the pavilions and it's not Burnham. The problem is the people who contributed to bringing stunning pavilions in behalf of a great man. And in fact, these people are local hucksters who've hijacked the celebration, a new set of cultural gatekeepers, dogmatic, slavish devotion to fantasy and European modernism that's about as far from the spirit of Chicago architecture as you can get, ideologues, devoted Europhiles, condescending, having the dead weight of intellectual baggage. Who, Lynn? Who are these people? Who are these evildoers? Why are we letting them in our city? With Burnham, architecture was about practicality and pragmatism. With Rosa and Somol, it's about fantasy and glib intellectual parlor games of misreading. Ah, it's Rosa and Somol, Somol and Rosa. That's the problem. The funny thing is that this list is actually a pretty good description of Burnham himself, if you think about it. Huckster, Europhile, ideologue. So it's so we realized that we were the problem. And it was a kind of easy shot for Becker to take. He left out Donna Robertson, who is the kind of third player in this, because it wouldn't have suited his these new people in the city hijacking theme. So Donna and IIT don't get mentioned at all. The condescending part was just directed to me. And it had to do with an introduction for Ben's lecture I gave, where I basically claimed Ben as a Chicago architect. I was tired of but there's no Chicago architects in it. How come they got left out? La, 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 la. And I said that, we had to be more ambitious about appropriating the world, not just assuming that where you paid your taxes was your form of identification. So back to the embassy model and John's idea of territoriality, I think that we can nominate in the same way that Neil was nominated to come in and do a kind of new Chicago from the genetic material of Chicago. I think that, Ben, you can be a Chicago architect without having to live in the city of Chicago. The question is, do you take up the disciplinary problem of Chicago is what makes you a Chicago architect, not where you live. So again, for me, the territoriality, if you will, is a disciplinary territoriality, not a geographic territoriality. So we were the problem. But what you get, this is the UN Studio Pavilion. And Doug Garofalo and his office worked as the local architects on it from our faculty. Now, so the problem is, of course, the immediate assumption is, who are these foreigners? Why didn't Chicago architects get it, even though they were involved with Chicago institutions and architects? And then, they have nothing to do with their context. I mean, this building could be anywhere. Zaha, could be anywhere. And I think that, again, there's a sense that Chicago is something. But when you think about the site, let's face it, the history of this site in a very short period, it was a lake, it was landfill, there was a train on it, there was parking on that, and they put down Millennium Park on top of that and planted it as if it were a 19th century park. There is no context here. There is no context in Chicago. That's what makes Chicago, Chicago. If there's one thing about Chicago, it's that it's not about context. It's a totally artificial constructed ground, and that really the UN Pavilion in particular, by floating above the ground, is a comment on that artifactuality, let's say. And clearly there are, let's say, other obvious connections, to Mises Farnsworth House. But I think also you don't have to go far. You can only just simply look over its shoulder to the Studio Gang Tower kind of rising one from the right in the background with the kind of eczema. To sort of think that within a 2-block radius you could start to account for this project. And in particular, let's say we could see Mies, you could see Goldberg. The idea of Mies and Goldberg, maybe a kind of continuity or isomorphism between exterior profile or form and interior organization. And the question might be, well, what are different ways to think about combining those things? I think the Genie Gang form does one, which is keeps the normative box and then wraps it in a new organic exterior that, in fact, doesn't change the organization of the developer units on the interior. So it's kind of camouflaging the box with the balconies. The other version, I think, is you keep the box as the exterior profile and you interiorize the Goldberg, which I think is what the UN Studio Pavilion does. So it seems to me that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that this project does operate within a discursive field of the immediate context and sets forth another position for how you could think about architecture. The other context, I guess, for this is that that we were associated, that Ben's office was associated with UIC, and so there is the kind of Walter Netsch field theory implicit in the project also, which is to say that rather than turning and rotating the pavilion 45 degrees, he rotates it 90 degrees, but the issue is so that the floor datum and the roof datum line up now, they're not offset, but the interior section has now registered that rotation inside of it. So these three kind of cloverleaf surfaces. Well, we'll get to the other things. And I think that, one thing I guess I want to say is that the UN Studio Pavilion is a kind of diagram, really. I mean, I think in the best spirit of really maybe not so much a celebration of the plan of Chicago as much as the White City. In other words, kind of pavilion of a fair architecture. It's temporary, but what it does is it suggests another possible future. So clearly there's an alternative domino in here also, although you could say everything, structure, circulation, aperture, connection and floor, ceiling, all come from the same system, such that this is a bad camera shot, but there's a person dancing on top. They climbed up through the surface of the kind of potato chip to the roof plane, because really you could say it's a diagram that's meant to be extendable up. In other words,